I want you to picture a split screen in your mind. It's a jarring image, but it's really the only way to understand what's happening right now.
Right.
So on the left side of your mental screen, you have the inside of a high-end conference room, Abu Dhabi.
Plush, climate controlled.
Totally. The coffee is probably incredible, served on, silver platters. Everyone's in perfectly pressed suits, speaking these hushed, diplomatic tones.
And then you look at the right side of the screen, and that reality is, well, it's apocalyptic.
It is.
You're looking at Ukraine, specifically Kyiv and Kharkiv. The thermometer has just bottomed out at minus 12 degrees Celsius.
That is bone-chilling cold.
And in that freezing darkness, you've got air raid sirens screaming, the power grid is flickering, it's failing, and artillery is just shaking the ground.
Yeah, it's the incredibly stark backdrop for what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
We're looking at a moment in history that is, it's both hopeful and terrifying at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the first ever trilateral peace talks. Russia, Ukraine, and the United States, all in one room.
It's a massive moment, and if you just glanced at the headlines on your phone this morning, you probably saw a very short, very discouraging phrase.
No breakthrough.
No breakthrough.
Which, honestly, it just feels like such a letdown. You see peace talks, you want to see peace.
Of course, but no breakthrough is, it's accurate, but it's also incredibly insufficient if you really want to understand the mechanics of what just happened.
Exactly. It sounds like a failure. It sounds like they sat there, stared at each other for a bit, and then just went home.
But that's not what happened. When you actually dig into the sources we have today, the diplomatic reports, the foreign ministry statements, the battlefield updates, there is so much more churning just beneath the surface.
The real story isn't that they didn't solve the war in 48 hours.
No. The story is why they met, what this mysterious anchorage formula is that everyone is suddenly whispering about, and how the grim reality on the battlefield, that right side of the split screen, is actively being used as a weapon at the negotiation table.
So the mission for this deep dive is to move past that boring headline. We need to understand the specific sticking points. We need to understand why winter itself is a weapon.
And we need to figure out if this is, real progress or just a diplomatic show. It's a classic case of what happens at the table being held hostage by what's happening in the trenches. So let's get into it.
Okay, first off, let's just set the stage for the event itself. This wasn't a Zoom call.
No, this was a physical meeting. It took place over 2 days in Abu Dhabi.
And the context here is just so vital.
It is. This was the first trilateral meeting between these three specific powers since the full-scale invasion began back in 2022.
Think about that for a second. For years, they've been talking at each other.
Or about each other.
Right, but not with each other. At least not in this format.
Exactly. Just getting the United States, Russia, and Ukraine into the same room, breathing the same air, that is a shift in the geopolitical tectonic plates.
It implies something has changed.
It implies that all sides have reached a point where they believe talking might, and I have to emphasize, might be more useful than just shooting.
But as we said, the immediate outcome, it was inconclusive. No champagne popping, no signing ceremony.
On the surface, yes. No peace treaty was signed, no ceasefire announced. But, and this is a massive but that we need to pay attention to,
What's that?
they didn't storm out.
They didn't flip the table?
They did not. In fact, an unnamed U.S. official confirmed to reporters that a new round of talks is already set to begin on February 1st.
Wait, February 1st? That's next Sunday.
Next Sunday.
That feels incredibly fast to me. I mean, usually in high-stakes diplomacy, these things move at a glacial pace. You have a meeting, then months of emails, then maybe another meeting next year.
A one-week turnaround signals urgency, it signals momentum. You don't book the same venue for a week later if the first meeting was a total disaster.
No, you only do that if you think there's something to build on.
You only do that if you have work left to do that you think is achievable.
We also heard directly from President Zelensky. He took to X, formerly Twitter, to give his take. And he used a phrase that I think we need to unpack.
What was it?
He said the focus was on possible parameters for ending the war.
Parameters. That is a heavy
It
phrase.
sounds so technical.
It is, but it's the skeleton of a peace deal. It means they're not just shouting slogans at each other. They are discussing lines on a map, rules of engagement.
And what really stood out to me in his statement was his heady emphasis on the United States.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't just mention them. He explicitly talked about the need for American monitoring and oversight to ensure security.
And that is the trust deficit in action. Zelensky is signaling very, very clearly that he does not trust a bilateral deal with Russia alone.
He's basically saying, I will not sign a piece of paper with Moscow.
Unless Washington is standing there holding the pen and promising to enforce it.
He wants a guarantor, a bodyguard for the peace treaty.
Exactly. He knows that without the U.S. committed to that oversight, any deal is just waiting to be broken.
So the meeting ends. They agree to meet next Sunday. We're currently in what the sources call a diplomatic pause. Now, to me, pause sounds like they're taking a nap, but I assume that's not what's happening here.
Far from it. A diplomatic pause is usually the busiest time of all. All sides agreed to report back to their capitals.
So the negotiators have to go ask the boss.
Precisely. They have the parameters, maybe a draft, maybe a map, but they don't have the final authority to say yes to the really hard stuff.
They need to get political cover.
They have to fly home to Zelensky, to Putin, and to the White House to coordinate the next steps. They need to know exactly how much wiggle room they have before they sit back down on February 1st.
It's interesting to check the vibe from the different camps during this pause.
It is.
The U.S. official said the decision to continue is a good sign and that a lot of work was done. It sounds cautiously optimistic.
It does. And even the Russian side is playing along, which is notable. The Russian state news agency, RIA Novosti, reported that Moscow remains open to continuing the dialogue.
Which isn't their usual tone.
No. Usually for domestic propaganda, you see a lot of posturing threats to walk away, insults. The fact that both sides are publicly saying, we're still talking, is the headline that got buried under no breakthrough.
However, and this is where we have to snap right back to that split-screen reality, while they were saying good sign in the warmth of Abu Dhabi, the situation on the ground in Ukraine was, well, it was deteriorating rapidly.
It really was. And this is the part that's just hard to stomach. You can't decouple the diplomacy from the violence.
They were happening at the same time.
Simultaneously. In fact, the sources suggest the violence escalated during the talks.
Let's look at the Ukrainian experience first. We have specific reports from the mayors of Kyiv and Kharkiv.
Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kyiv, reported serious airstrikes. And remember that temperature we mentioned, -12.
That's not just put on a sweater cold.
No, that is pipes burst and people die cold. And the strikes hit the infrastructure, keeping people warm.
Of course.
They damaged critical energy infrastructure, leaving 6,000 buildings without heating.
6,000 buildings. That's essentially a small city's worth of people suddenly plunging into freezing temperatures in the middle of winter.
Exactly. 1 person died, 4 were wounded in Kyiv. But if you look at Kharkiv, the targeting was arguably even more horrific.
What happened there?
Mayor Ihor Terekhov reported damage to a maternity hospital and a hostel for displaced people.
A maternity hospital.
Yes.
That is. It's hard to find words for that. You're talking about newborns, mothers.
And 31 people were hurt there. It's a brutal reminder of the lack of limits in this conflict.
And President Zelensky was pretty clear on what he thought the strategic goal was.
He was. He said the main target across the board was energy infrastructure. They are trying to freeze the country out.
It's a strategy of attrition. Make life so unbearable that the population demands peace at any cost.
Precisely. And the reaction from the Ukrainian foreign minister, Andrei Sybiha, was blistering. He didn't mince words at all.
What did he say?
He said the attack was cynically ordered by Putin and that it hit not only our people, but also the negotiation table.
That's a powerful image. Hitting the negotiation table.
It's more than a metaphor. He's arguing that these attacks make diplomacy almost impossible. He said this proves Putin belongs at a tribunal facing war crimes charges, not at a peace board.
Imagine the tension.
I can't. You are sitting across from representatives of a government that is, at that very moment, bombing your maternity hospitals. It would take a stomach of steel to keep talking.
But, in the interest of a full picture, we have to look at the other side of the ledger. The sources also detail accusations from the Russian side about attacks during this same window.
Right, and we need to present this neutrally, as the source does. The governor of Belgorod, Vyacheslav Gladkov, reported that Ukraine launched its biggest bombardment yet on his city.
And Belgorod is right across the border from Kharkiv, correct?
That's correct. It's a major staging ground for a lot of Russian operations. Gladkov claimed energy infrastructure was damaged there too, though he reported no casualties.
But then there was a much more serious accusation.
A very serious one, coming from the Russian-controlled part of the Kherson region.
This was the ambulance incident.
Yes. Russia accused Ukraine of using a drone to attack a clearly marked ambulance in the village of Holopristan. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, stated that 3 medics were killed.
And obviously, if that's true, attacking medical transport is a severe violation.
It's a violation of international humanitarian law, plain and simple. Zakharova emphasized that heavily. She's using it to paint Ukraine as the aggressor, or at least, as equally lawless.
It is important to note, though, that our source material, specifically the BBC, stated they could not independently verify these specific reports from either side.
That's a standard disclaimer in war reporting, but the accusations themselves are what matter for the diplomacy. When you have accusations of war crimes flying back and forth, bombing maternity wards on one side, drone strikes on ambulances on the other, it poisons the well. It makes trust, which is already at zero, somehow go into the negatives.
And yet, despite all of that, the freezing cold, the bombed hospitals, the drone strikes, they are meeting again next Sunday.
Which brings us to the core dispute. Why? Why are they meeting if the fighting is this bad? What are they actually arguing about in that room in Abu Dhabi?
Zelensky said it clearly in Davos. He said, it's all about the land.
That is the crux of it. This is the issue which is not solved yet. Currently, Russia occupies roughly 20% of Ukraine.
And this is where we need to unpack a term that popped up in the research. It's a term I hadn't heard before this week. The Anchorage Formula.
It sounds like the title of a spy thriller, doesn't it? The Anchorage Formula, but it seems to be absolutely central to these negotiations.
So what is it?
Well, according to the sources, this term refers to a meeting that took place last August.
August. So this has been brewing for months.
Yes, it took place in Anchorage, Alaska, and this is the key detail. Sources say this was a meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin.
Wait. So this framework was established before these trilateral talks even started, before the formal diplomatic push.
That appears to be the case. The formula that reportedly came out of that meeting was an agreement, or at least a proposal, to allow Russia to take the Donbas region.
Luhansk and Donetsk.
Right. And keep control of Crimea, which they annexed back in 2014.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, the Anchorage Formula is essentially Russia gets to keep the land it has prioritized.
That's the simplified version, yes. Land for peace. Russia keeps the east and south. The war ends.
And I can see why that would be a complete non-starter for Kyiv.
Exactly. This is where the conflict of visions just crashes into each other. The Kremlin aide, Yuri Ushakov, was very specific this week. He said a lasting settlement is unlikely without addressing the territorial issue based on this Anchorage Formula.
So Russia is sitting in Abu Dhabi saying, we have a roadmap. It was discussed in Alaska with Trump. Stick to it.
Precisely. They feel like the deal was already softly agreed to by the U.S. But then you have Ukraine. Zelensky has ruled out handing over large areas of land. He specifically ruled out giving up the Donbas.
So you have the Anchorage Formula on one side saying give up the land, and Ukraine's absolute refusal to cede that territory on the other. That's not a small gap.
It's a canyon. And that is why the fighting continues. Both sides are trying to change the reality on the ground to force the other side to move on that specific point.
Russia is bombing energy grids to say, take the deal or freeze.
And Ukraine is fighting back to say, we will not trade our land for safety.
We also need to talk more about the role of the U.S. here. We mentioned President Trump meeting Putin in Anchorage, but there's more to this back-channel diplomacy that's fascinating.
There is. Trump has claimed that Putin accepted an invitation to join what he calls a board of peace.
A board of peace? What is that? It sounds like a corporate retreat for billionaires.
It does. It's described as an organization focused on ending global conflicts. Now, we have to put a crucial caveat here. Putin has not confirmed this.
Okay, this is Trump's claim.
Yeah.
Noted.
Right. But Zelensky also mentioned something interesting regarding his own interactions with Trump.
What was that?
He said he reached an agreement with Trump on future U.S. security guarantees. But, and this is a huge bureaucratic hurdle we cannot ignore, Zelensky noted these guarantees would need approval from both the U.S. Congress and the Ukrainian parliament.
Right, because in the U.S., a president can't just sign a treaty on a napkin. It has to be ratified.
Exactly. And we all know how unpredictable Congress can be. So even if the leaders agree in Abu Dhabi, the legislatures have to sign off. It adds another layer of complexity.
So it's not just about what happens in the room.
It's about what can actually pass a vote in Washington and Kyiv.
And speaking of things happening outside the room, we have to talk about the day before the Abu Dhabi talks. There was a pre-meeting that really sets the stage.
This is one of those details that just highlights how high the stakes are. The day before the trilateral talks, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and, get this, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, were in Moscow.
In Moscow, not on neutral ground.
Right in the Kremlin. They had a 4-hour meeting with Putin.
4 hours is a long time. You don't spend 4 hours just exchanging pleasantries.
No, it implies a deep dive into the details. They were likely hashing out the specifics of that anchorage formula, trying to see where Putin might budge.
And what came out of that meeting?
Well, after that meeting, Kremlin aide Ushakov said Putin emphasized a sincere commitment to settling the crisis by political and diplomatic means.
Sincere commitment.
Yeah.
I have to say, it is hard to reconcile that phrase with the airstrikes on maternity hospitals we just discussed.
That's the paradox of modern warfare and diplomacy, isn't it? You have high-level envoys like Kushner and Witkoff sitting in Moscow talking about sincere commitment, and 24 hours later, missiles are hitting energy grids in Kyiv.
It almost feels like the diplomacy provides cover for the war, or the war provides leverage for the diplomacy.
It's both. They're completely intertwined.
So let's try to pull all this together for you. We have a no-breakthrough summit that is somehow continuing next week.
We have an anchorage formula that suggests ceding land, which Ukraine absolutely refuses to do.
And we have a war that is freezing and killing civilians on both sides as we speak.
It is an incredibly precarious moment. The negotiators are planning to meet again in a week, but the fundamental disconnect hasn't changed. That gap between the anchorage formula Russia keeps the land and Ukraine's position is still vast.
And the clock is ticking because winter is here. The human cost isn't theoretical. It's measured in degrees below zero and buildings without heat.
And that pressure is being applied directly to the negotiators. When Sybiha says the attack hit the negotiation table, he means it. Every missile strike is a message. Every failed heating grid is a bargaining chip.
It's cynical, it's brutal.
But it's the reality of how these things are settled.
It really makes you wonder about the nature of these talks next Sunday.
It does. And that brings us to the big question we want to leave you with.
Right. We want you to mull this over.
We know the negotiation table is under attack, metaphorically and literally. We know the proposed solution, this anchorage plan, requires one side to give up 20% of its territory, which they have sworn they will not do. So you have to ask yourself,
is the upcoming second round of talks in Abu Dhabi a sign of genuine progress? Is there some middle ground we aren't seeing?
Or is it simply a formality? Are they just keeping the suits busy in Abu Dhabi while the real decision is being made by artillery and frostbite on the battlefield? Is the diplomacy leading the war, or is the war leading the diplomacy?
That is the question. We will be watching very closely next Sunday to see if February 1st brings any kind of answer.
We certainly will.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll catch you on the next one.